My name is Elizabeth East. I'm delighted to make a brief introduction for our two speakers here today. The first on your left is Christopher Miles. When I started writing an introduction for Christopher, it ended up being about 3 pages. So I urgently called him last night and said, can you please send me a very brief bio? So I begin with Christopher. Christopher is an LA-based artist, writer, curator, and educator. He has taught at Art Center College of Design, the Claremont Graduate University, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Southern California. He also teaches at Cal State Long Beach. He has taught there since 1968. 68. I know it's a long time, Christopher.
I know I looked old.
Thousands of students. 98. He served as chair of the Department of Art from 2010 to 2012, and briefly as the inaugural director of the university's newly designated School of Art. He now serves as the interim dean of Cal State Long Beach. Between 1995 and 2010, he published extensively on Los Angeles art in, I was counting, about 18 different publications. He has also curated many exhibitions about art focusing on Southern California. In recent years, he has shifted the balance of his practice back to studio production, and currently there are 2 solo shows that you can see in Los Angeles. One of them is at Acme Gallery, and the second is at the Pasadena Museum of California Art. The show at Acme continues through April 27th, and the one in Pasadena until July 28th. I'm also thrilled to announce that Chris has accepted an invitation from LA Louver to participate in this summer's Rogue Wave 13. So you are the first people to hear the announcement that Chris will be part of that show, and we are delighted. Thank you, Chris. Second, we have Matt Wedel. Excuse me for my notes here. Matt was born and raised in Colorado. He has been working with clay since the age of 2. So he comes with over 25 years worth of experience of working in the medium, which I think, based on our experience of the exhibition below, comes as no surprise. He earned his BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2005 and his MFA from Cal State Long Beach in 2007, where he studied with Tony Marsh, the distinguished ceramicist and teacher. And he, Matt, that is, continued to teach at the university. He was then courted by a number of different institutions across North America, including the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, RISD, and the University of Colorado. One of the aspects that he was drawn to in each of those locations were the large kilns that afforded him to make the kind of work that you see again below. However, the work you see below has all been accomplished in the last year. He moved in early 2012 to near Athens, Ohio with his family, and he built his own studio and kiln, very large kiln there. So he's been working since that time on the exhibition below. His work has received national attention with inclusion in exhibitions at Ellis Armory, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. He was included in the 67th Scripps Annual in Claremont, the Brevard Art Museum in Melbourne, Florida, and in the exhibition curated by David Pagel called Stone Gravy at Ameringa McHenry Yohe Fine Art in New York. We first showed Matt's work in Rogue Wave 09, and we began working with him a couple of years later, formally representing him. We took his work to Art Basel 2 years in 2010 and 2011, and as a result of that and of our presentations here at LA Louver, now his work is in collections throughout the US and as far afield as Britain, France, Italy, Switzerland, and Turkey. This show that we have below is his first solo show with us. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Chris. The talk will last, I think, for about an hour. And afterwards, please continue downstairs to enjoy the refreshments, and Susan at the front desk will also validate your parking. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm gonna restart this. And I don't know how to start this. I was kind of curious.
I'll start.
Oh, good.
Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay. Well, hi, and welcome. And I'd just like to say quickly, I first met Matt when he was a student, and actually he turned up in one of my classes right at the moment when he was just starting to begin to make the kind of work really that led to the work that you see downstairs. And so I've had this great experience of watching that sort of epic develop, that young epic. And I remember the first time I saw one of his figurative pieces, just being so excited about it and just seeing in that moment the potential. And there's nothing greater, I think, as a teacher than seeing when a student seizes upon something that has amazing potential and then watching them carry it through those next stages, because there's all kinds of wrong turns that one can make from that moment of great potential. And when one sees a student just take it to the next level and the next level and the next level, being able to watch that and now, being able to sit here with them, it's really an honor for me and a pleasure. So thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us that show downstairs.
Appreciate it.
And I think it would be helpful, and I think it's apropos given the picture here on the screen, if you could talk just a little about the process itself and the studio experience, how you're now making the work and where you're making it.
Yeah. This is the first time that I've had a studio, and had, my own space. I think I've been traveling around and doing teaching positions, and it's been amazing because I've been able to go to these programs and just kind of work with students and just explode, have be kind of a technician way, to students who never really worked with clay sometimes, and just, we can build anything, let's figure it out. And they've just been these amazing, fruitful periods of time for me, pushing myself and seeing, just working with other artists, and it's been phenomenal. Really short bursts of time and then leave and then not have to pick up after myself, which is really nice. Or deal with the repercussions of what I did to the students. And but this year is the first time that I've had my own studio in a while, or as a working artist, and so with not many distractions and just work full time with studio, and it's been amazing. And so usually all this body work downstairs was built simultaneously, so much closer, maybe only a couple feet between each piece in my studio, as you can see. But usually, I work without much. My favorite way of working is going into a space and not really having any expectations or knowledge of where it's going to go, and start working really intuitively, and then usually on small pieces, and then immediately, like it hasn't failed, 3 pieces come out of that in the space, like in my head, and I start working on those, and then from that, maybe 6 pieces will come out, and I'll work on those, and usually begin working until the first piece needs attention again, and that sometimes kind of clarifies maybe the body of work that I'd be engaging with over a period of time, 4 months or 3 months, 3 weeks, or depending on, but in this case, maybe 8 months or so. And so usually pretty intense. It's period of working time, yeah. I love it, yeah. So what do I think?
Could you talk a little bit about the kind of density we see here? You mentioned not being 2 or 3 feet between pieces, and I'm wondering if you'd talk about that as an atmosphere. When Matt was a student, he was legendary. He was like a gas. He could fill any space, no matter how large it was. And he was really legendary for that. He still is legendary at our university, I think, for that, because you would walk into a space that where he would be beginning something, and you might not get back there for a few days or a week, and you would come back, and it would be full of objects that were under production. And I think there is something about that dynamic that fuels the work. And so I'm wondering if you'd talk a little more about that.
I think the beautiful thing about the way I work in the material is that I can only work maybe an inch and a half, at a time, So I don't have the patience maybe creatively to just work on one piece because I'll just destroy it. I'll build too quick and I just build too quick. So I end up kind of it functioning really well, so I can work on this piece and then just see something over there and be like, oh, and then start on that. And then, it's kind of challenging because if I have any free moment in my day, I'll start a piece. And sometimes it gets a little crazy because sometimes then it's like, oh, too much work's going on, and I have to stop. And I think I like that way of working because I can just meander with my thoughts and follow and trust kind of intuition and I think because anymore the material is becoming so much more fluid, I don't feel like there's a break between my idea and the objects that I'm making, and so it seems more just like they're more effortless. It doesn't seem like work. I guess that was the initial intention for working the way I do, is like trying to figure out systems that don't seem like work. Like I can work like 100% and it doesn't seem like work, And so that's kind of maybe what my work's about in a way.
Could you talk a little bit about? I'm curious about how sort of ingredients of experience come together in who you are now and where the work is now. As Elizabeth mentioned, you've been around this since you were a child. You're a second generation ceramist. But then you also, you studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. You then went through an MFA program. Mm-hmm. I think there's other life experience that figures into all of this. So I'm wondering if you could maybe try to walk us through how some of those pieces fit together.
So I grew up. My father is a functional potter, and I think it's 38 years. Me, how many? 38 years. Me now. And he's here today. It was really exciting for him to come. And so, I think it was tremendous as a son, of someone working with a material, just to kind of observe their individual kind of build a kind of way of communicating through a material language or a material process. A material. Building a dialogue or a language around a material. And mostly watching, some occasionally breaking, and work, but mostly watching. And then I went to school to study sculpture, not, kind of setting ceramic aside. Went to Art Institute Chicago, and really quickly, as the program started to kind of break me apart, and just begin to kind of break apart every kind of value I had and try to figure out, who I was and what I wanted to be as an artist, and kind of rip me apart to start from scratch. I didn't really have. I was working with these formal, abstract, kind of metal sculptures, and I just didn't feel a connection anywhere to begin with. So I ended up going back into ceramics from the sculpture program because it seemed like a point, like one concrete point to begin. Because from that, I didn't know who I was, Mm-hmm. And so then kind of start building and piecing together images and references and then coming here, which started off as kind of these abstractions of landscape and interest in child drawings and things. Because, I think my parents were separated for a long time, and so our images of my history were disappeared, I think, for a lot of my childhood. So I kind of forgot a lot about my childhood. And when I started working, I think my dad found a bunch of images, and it was like this flood of memory that came back to me. And so I was really interested in kind of I guess I started building myself as an artist during that time. It was really influential. But they were abstractions of landscape, kind of drawings in space, and picked up from there when I came to LA, and it became really quickly became clear that abstraction wasn't necessarily, I didn't have the language, the vocabulary to work with, to engage the stuff in my head. And had to force myself to work representationally on these objects. And that kind of allowed me to start building a way of working and building images and absorbing images. And so I don't know. I really feel like this work started, when I came to LA and was exposed to, I came here frightened of, this kind of surf culture, lackadaisical surf culture, And I was like, my art career is like, I thought it was like a really detrimental, it could be like really detrimental to my career, like moving here. And because from Chicago, and I don't know, and the stereotype of LA from Chicago maybe. And came here and I was just like, was so kind of knocked on my feet by a number of artists that were working in Long Beach at that time that were just really blowing anything out of the water that I've ever seen. Like Kristen Morgan had these giant cars, and Hwa-Jin Lee is a Korean, I guess Korean-American Korean artist who just freaked me out. And there was this life-size shipwreck that was in the studios that took up the entire studio, and Sung-Gu Ya is another Korean artist, and so it was just kind of it's like, it forced me to learn how to work, and from there I think that's where all of this came from, was those influences and being engaged in that energy and from those studios. And
Are there particular sort of cultural reference points that you see coming through in the work that again have to do with historical influences or experiences, travel experiences? Yeah,
I mean, when I was a student, I got to travel into like Japan and see this Hundertwasser's incineration plant in Japan, and I think it was in Osaka. And when I was a grad student, we went to I would study kind of architectural ceramics in Barcelona, and Niki de Saint Phalle and Gaudi, and came back and just was like, and went to Florence. And really, at the time, whenever I started working representationally from these images, and so that became a source that I started to just fuel me, I mean, going to the Vatican and seeing this like 10-foot tall baby, marble baby. I think it was intended maybe to be higher, but it was on the ground level. So it's such an awkward experience seeing this like voluptuous kind of, very sexualized young baby, like 10-foot tall baby in my space, and I was just like, in this very really, powerful institution, it was a really awkward situation. And that was really, I came back and I was just delighted by that, and started working with these figures and playing with scale. And the influences really meandered through and progressed through kind of child drawing to folk painting to different folk paintings, American, Korean folk painting in terms of the floral kind of landscape interests, and to Henry Rousseau, to Dutch child portraiture, to Italian 17th century etchings. And I mean, I think there's a thing that kind of connects them all, which is a lot of them, maybe the references were kind of unknown artists, and there was something about them that were just, were delightful, but then so upsetting. And so it seems to continue a continual progression of influence.
There is a kind of mythic, for me there's a mythic aspect to the work, and I think one of the things that's curious about the work is you look at the work, and it is to me it is suggestive of myth, it is suggestive of legend, it is suggestive of religious imagery, it's suggestive of so much that we know from a history of art, and yet at the same time it seems very personal, very idiosyncratic, and you can't necessarily point to the works and say, oh, well, this is the tale of that, or this is, such and such biblical reference, etc. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that relationship to myth, to story, or maybe just to some kind of concept of narrative in general.
I dropped the figurative work for a while because I was confused about narrative, because I was working through these historical references to kind of feed this vocabulary of how to make objects, like working from history, and at the same time having works come out that were just works from my own imagination, and were like filtered through that, kind of working simultaneously between these two bodies of work. And I think more and more they're starting to merge and confuse each other, or I don't know. But I dropped the figure, not confuse each other, but more merge. They're not separate anymore. But I stopped working figuratively because I was confused about how narrative was going to function, because I was working from these historical narratives, I guess. And I guess I wanted to build my own. I was confused about, if I wanted to just mimic or recreate those narratives or build my own narrative. And so this is the first body of figurative work that is kind of just starting to piece that together. And I don't know if I'm interested in within mythology about taking narrative or working within narratives from mythology, or if I'm interested in, as an artist, like stealing energy from like figures in mythology, from my own self, like Hercules, or like these powerful figures, like if I could be that, or like to, not Hercules, that's maybe a funny reference, but, or like too heroic or something, but just animating my own the possibility of myself as an individual and maker, and I don't know. So, but, the narratives are, I don't know if I see the narratives very fractured and fragmented, and since they're seen as kind of individual kind of objects versus like an installation or narrated between two objects, I think they seem like fragments of history or fragments of something from the past, and but kind of elusive or not tangible. So yeah.
Okay. I was thinking leading up to doing this that what an interesting situation we have, because Matt's show is downstairs, and here we're upstairs, and we're in this room full of work by Charles Garabedian, and which I think is an amazing pairing of two exhibitions and the way that they resonate against one another. And then when I think about Chaz, what you and Chaz. Separated by 60 years of age, which is amazing for both of you, and very different childhood experiences, life experiences, and yet I see a certain kinship between the two of you, and that both of you in a way have found a kind of power in your work in touching upon these varied references that range from classical through folk, through in some instances more pop cultural. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about it. Seems to me that we've got two artists who are separated by such a gulf of time, and yet they're both finding in a contemporary moment a mode of expression that is related. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about what is this kind of imagery doing for you? How is this kind of imagery that ties to so many historical precedents powerful in the present for someone who is a product of the late 20th century and early 21st century?
I don't know. No, it's okay. I think wanting, I don't know, something like wanting the work to be beyond me or beyond, not beyond culture, but beyond, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I guess with Chaz, he's in the military, maybe? Wasn't he in?
He was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And had some pretty, like, I think, intense jobs, as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I guess maybe it's this idea of, like, letting go of that, and building your own language, I guess, within that. Correct. I don't know about building a world, but I don't know, kind of like letting go of your past, but at the same time, kind of, I don't know why I'm saying letting go.
Okay.
I mean, I think with this material, you kind of have to let go in a way because like you can't have any expectations because it all could collapse, at any moment. I think even because the moment you know what you're doing, something just, it just slams you to the ground and tells you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much failure within the material, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
or everything's on the brink of failure, or insects, like, okay, it worked, So maybe there's a letting go of that maybe I engage with in my practice, maybe that he did in terms of it with his life. I don't know. And
Well, I'm wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about what compels you. I mean, I remember watching you as a student take on these things that were so just shockingly ambitious, and in a field and in a material where that issue of failure rate often I think tends to kind of grind people into a more tentative position, a safer position in terms of what they undertake. And I remember observing you as someone who had just these colossal successes, right? And colossal failures. When something really big falls, it falls hard. Yeah. And so in a field where things, the more ambitious you get, the degree of difficulty goes up so fast. And where many of the things that you make are so far in an ambition level beyond what most people would even expect in the field. What compels you to be so prolific and also so ambitious in terms of what you're taking on?
I think just the idea of how do you push yourself as an individual to be just fully engaged, with what you're doing, and fully clear and fully engaged with your life, And this idea maybe at that point of like pushing myself, maybe even with this show, like pushing myself to the point where you collapse and then reel back a little bit, to see how engaged you can be and how fully alive you can be. And I think it's about that in terms of where the energy comes from and where the excitement and and like openness to allow myself to, follow things, even if I might be worried about maybe how they might be viewed or something. Like just be okay. I mean that. Just if it seems right, follow it. Yeah, I'm interested in. Yeah, I think that's the whole idea of maybe as an artist too. Like I wanted to build a practice where I was just fully engaged with life, I guess, and I think the work just a repercussion of that, maybe. I'm gonna see if I can. I thought you could scroll here, whatever. Does that make sense, or is that?
Matt, I'm wondering if you could also talk a little bit maybe about the kind of space that you're in terms of where you make the work. We're here, and we have this very dense exhibition downstairs. But you make this work in a pretty remote location, and that's a location that you chose. You exhibit the work in these very urban contexts and very culturally dense and complex contexts, but you make the work pretty removed from all of that now. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that distance, knowing in that distance that you're making this work for a very different kind of viewing experience for your audience.
I mean, I think I'd be as remote if I was here too, you know? Like I probably wouldn't be any different. You know, at least when I was a student here, that was kind of the case. And so I don't know if it, I mean, I think there's, certainly an amount of interest that is, sorry, I don't know how this is, to fix that. I don't know, I think since I see the works as kind of isolated objects, they could function in any kind of context. I mean, I try to figure out how they seem in place here, or they seem in place there. I don't know. It seems like they could function. I'm saying function. That's a funny word in this. I don't know
what is you use the word function? So how do you think of them as functioning?
I mean, my dad always calls them, how are your pots doing? And it's not a casserole dish, Dad. It's like, it's a pony, you know, it's like, or it's a, so I don't know, maybe I just slipped. But, yeah, they seem to function really interesting down there because they're well, it's challenging. I mean, I guess I see them functioning really well as individual objects because they seem darker whenever they're individual, you know, when the color's not. I mean, as a composition, it seems like the eye almost tends to kind of go drift from color to color, and there's like an initial delight, you know? And I think when you start to engage them individually, certain things start, like how do you engage? I guess the meaning behind when their meaning is resonant, you know, that's when it's functional, I guess. That's when it's functioning. And I mean, sometimes I imagine my work being okay if I were to just build it and then it were to disappear, you know? Because sometimes that becomes like enough for me as an artist to see it, and then it would almost be nicer if it did, you know, because then you wouldn't be burdened by this object, and it would just you could still be engaged with it and then just be fluid, you know, and like disappear and go through these kind of ephemeral kind of bursts of energy. But at the same time, there's something that totally happens that's so phenomenal with the material when you engage color and it becomes more fixed and in your space, in real space, it's you know, it becomes more fixed, kind of concrete object. You know. That didn't. I don't know if I'm not answering your questions.
No, you are. You are in your way. That's fine.
Good.
What do you see as the biggest concerns in the work right now?
I think this piece really opened up for me because I just noticed myself treating the floral kind of elements similar to the way I was treating color, like kind of the just responding as I was making, instead of falling to kind of a preset kind of complexity of the petal forms. So that was really, I felt like opened up a tremendous amount of just excitement in the work of I mean, I think the floral pieces were building up over a period of years, and kind of like loosened up in this show in terms of these. There's two pieces in the show downstairs that I was just so excited that I allowed myself to to decide as I was working, you know, to have it be like in the act of placement and engaging the form with the looseness that I was dealing with these pieces. What your question was about, like what was your question?
The main concerns right now.
Main concerns. I guess how narrative could function, and if I wanted to, you know, be more like building. I think it needs to be kind of isolated and fragmented. I don't necessarily think I'm building a story of anything necessarily. Right now, it doesn't seem that way.
But are you building fragments of stories? I mean, is that part of what it's
that's
about?
not how they seem. They just seem as moments. I guess so, but I don't know the whole story though. Yeah, I'm like, you know, caught in the middle of it, and then it just leaves, and then I get sucked into this one burst, and then it moves on, I guess.
Do you have any images of works in progress?
Yeah, I wish I could flip through this. I did that the first time. So there's a few, you know, images of me kind of negotiating these like 500-pound eggshells or something that are about to collapse, you know. And so I mean, even when I build them together, they're isolated. And it's important for me to, I think each engagement of the work, I feel like it's so important for me in terms of having a print of where I'm at, or print of my own clarity, or print of my own lack of clarity, you know. And to be able to look back at that versus, I mean, so like every petal is, you know, handmade. I don't want to make a mold of it or anything.
Did you ever deep sea dive?
Only in a. No, I did it in Utah. There was like a landlocked hot mineral springs that it was like 150 feet deep that I scuba dived in, but it wasn't really. There wasn't a lot to look at. There were some rubber crabs in there. Lobsters, I mean, rubber lobsters that they had. But most of these aren't really coming from real. Right now, they started as just idea of flower. I think that was the first. The floral pieces started to be the first pieces, kind of from my own that started to come out from my own kind of idea of flower, idea of landscape, and then it became like idea of figure, and still is that way, you know. I think they're reminiscent of. I think they started to be kind of have filter in like landscape from this area for sure. But I didn't know that until I left, you know. Then people would be like, that's that, you know.
Do you have any early pictures of when you first got here and how the work has changed? Or they all, I guess?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna do this because. So this is more like
That's
kind of drawings in space.
is that early grad school, Matt? Is that what?
Right before grad school, I made this
Okay.
body of work that I thought I wasted my entire time at school, and then for my thesis show, and then this kind of body of work kind of exploded out of that frustration, which led to this kind of drawings in space and pushing material till it collapses and kind of reeling back, and then they kind of slowly became more floral, and
I remember.
that was maybe the first piece that kind of became more representational. And these, objects, these studies that have forced myself to do like this, the Vecchio and this Persian toy pony. And I could play with scale and color, I think, but I had to be fixed to kind of the form because I didn't know how to build, representationally really. Anymore, I think my works are letting their abstraction come back more into or being okay with abstraction in my work. And I think that's maybe a challenge that I'm interested in approaching with the works and letting them be abstract,
I'd like to get some more questions from the group, but before we do, I want to ask one last thing, and that is that, when you sort of began down this path with this work, I think you were in a very different position in your life, and since then you've gotten married, you've had a child, you've set up a home and kind of a homestead, and there's a maturing that's happening in your life and change that is happening in your life, shifting roles. And I'm wondering how you might see that coinciding with a maturing in the work.
I think I'm learning to not. Here, sorry. I wish I knew how to use this. I'm going to flip through here. I think I'm finding myself not wanting to follow my rules anymore, or like follow rules that maybe I set up for myself in the beginning, and whether it be ideas of like representation or I've noticed myself wanting to break my own rules a lot more and let go of structures that I placed for myself from the beginning. And so that's the biggest, I think, interest or excitement that I have in being, I guess, more fluid with my practice as an artist.
Questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, how do you feel or how do you relate to decoration? Like, a lot of the work to me feels like ruminations on decorative materials, like lawn decorations or landscaping, things you'd find outdoors, like peeing cherubs, fountains, like kind of like sci-fi fountain or something. Is that something you're interested in, or like do lawns influence you?
Not in that way, but in terms of, like integrate like plant systems and but human kind of controlled kind of plant systems, that are like hyper-functioning plant systems. That's really inspiring. But more from the works seem more fragments of architecture, maybe, or fragments of like maybe dwelling or city structures or something, or more than trying to build works for that, for that context, maybe, of a garden or like to go next to the cherub, peeing cherub. And I don't know I think there was a couple pieces downstairs. There was a couple wall pieces that they have and that we didn't show, and then another flat piece down there that seemed to function more, possibly function or like it came out of some kind of architectural context, and as like an embellishment or ornamentation of architecture, and so I think maybe the work might be going in that direction too, or splitting a little bit in both as these kind of fragments of architecture, or as well as kind of these independent moments, or
And the largest, sorry, were you finished?
someone was saying, asked it the other night if it was okay if they called it gaudy pieces, and I was like, yeah.
And your larger scale work, what do you use as an armature for pieces? So do you stuff them with anything?
No, they're just hollow.
But don't they have to be stuffed or something to build it on so that the form?
No, I mean, it's kind of like filling. It's like the opposite of stone carving. So instead of I mean, you're just filling in space basically as you go, and with a thin wall. And so you're just kind of, a lot of times I'll be, drawing in space and trying to figure out where the work can fit to, because a lot of times once you get up to here, you can't go back and correct what you did initially. And so mostly it's just kind of filling in space that you see, with a thin wall. So there are no, I mean, with a figure, there's a column. The column goes to the base. It can't, it's just technically, I mean, it can't stand on a horizontal surface. So the column goes straight down, but that's only.
So they're built to bear their own load, basically, as
Yeah.
you're building.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I was really interested in your choices about scale. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
I mean, I think initially it was the idea of these, trying to build these objects that were themselves, or these kind of real objects versus objects that I would engage in my imagination. Like I was thinking of an animal kind of on a pedestal or something. You engage it, majority of it is in your head, imagining it in this different context. And I was interested in having them, if you take that animal and then you blow it up and put it in real space, it seems to become real, more real in a way, more, and so that was, you're confronted by the object, and instead of in your head, you're kind of confronted by it in the space, and so that was an interest. And same with color. I was thinking about kind of not necessarily trying to mimic anything or mimic. Glaze is really good, or ceramics is really good at being trompe-l'oeil at stuff, and like wood or rust. And I wasn't really interested in kind of it being mimicking anything or trying to be something else. And so letting the material kind of be itself, kind of be glass. They seemed more like it wasn't trying to be something. It seemed not sincere, but it seemed more. It wasn't trying to be anything else but itself.
I wanted to ask you about your works on paper, your paintings on paper, and what role they might play in the process of your evolving, whether they stand on their own or they're working out of ideas for sculptures. How do you relate to those?
This is another example of like breaking rules. Like initially they were totally separate, and not doing drawings or maquette, But the more and more, like this drawing in my studio, like became an, influential. Like I let go of that rule because it, inspired a number of pieces in the show, And so I kind of let myself work for my drawings in this exhibition. But it's, you engage without, it's not you don't have gravity to deal with. But the other challenge is it becomes, an interest in working with drawing is that has to do with intent, everything is intentional, whereas with ceramics there's a certain amount of, letting go and kind of like curious, eagerness to be surprised or being told what you're making, by something else versus defining everything. And I really like, I think that's such, there's a really openness in that practice that is exciting, but at the same time, having control. I also want to know, where I'm coming from when I have total control. And so I guess that's what the drawings do for me.
A couple of dichotomies in the work between the plant forms and the sort of geological, geometric bases that they're on, and then also between the figural work and these plant form works.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to all be happening simultaneously in the studio from the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you could talk about those back and forth.
So hard. I mean, I think for me, those decisions are nonverbal, They're when I make that decision, it's like image or energy or kind of trying to clarify an image when I, and so, and when they come out, then it's when I kind of, then they tell me what they are, I guess. So maybe the decision-wise, like there's with the animal, like the animal with kind of figurehead on the flowers, came from just an image of the smaller flower that's disconnected from the kind of geometric faceted structures. Just being in the studio and then all of a sudden seeing this like large animal drape, kind of impaled on this kind of flower structure. And being, okay, that's kind of how I decide which works, and the faceted structures, though, came back from the initial kind of abstraction or metal works that I did from the beginning. These kind of David Smith inspired kind of, they were really limited, those works, and I let go of that. And some of them were kind of faceted interpretation of these Peter Volka sculptures, like some of those early ones. And I kind of let that go, and slowly, in trying to figure out my own idea of landscape, that kind of permeated back into my work. I think that's what I'm interested in letting be more abstract, is those faceted structures, even though initially they started out as like rock, or it was like, no, that's not an abstract, that's a rock, that's a specific thing. But I think I'm letting go of that too. And I feel like there's more openness in the work when I do that.
You mentioned that you had an ambitious approach to certain projects, and that sometimes you'd have to dial it back, when a piece might collapse. And I was wondering what your emotional relationship is to a piece that didn't succeed or might have collapsed.
I was thinking about when I collapse. Usually when the pieces collapse, then I crank it up a little bit, But I think, like I said, it's like relief, Like I was working for a show, or when I had the show up here, I was working on these pieces, and everything that I was working on, disappeared within a period of like 24 hours, and it ended up that 3 pieces we ended up showing in the show, and it was, I remember happening and being so relieved, I was like, oh, it felt so wonderful, because I was able to engage it and then as an object, and it just disappeared. But I mean, trying to read every disaster, and take it apart. And I love when my work blows up and collapses, because I know I can figure out how not to do that, And so that's really exciting. And anymore, I look forward to that, because it's such an intense, like, emotional experience, And it's powerful. It's really powerful.
Well, I also think that for you somehow it's an impetus. I remember once when walking by, as one of those cataclysmic failures had just taken place when you were a student, and then walking by, and there's Matt in the middle of the deep sigh that comes in the wake of that moment. And then, I had to go somewhere, and then walking back by about a half an hour later, and there's Matt back to work. And there is something, I mean, it's almost a Shiva kind of thing. I don't know what it is, but there is something that you have this practice that is about this sort of ambitious undertaking where you're trying to both realize this vision while trying to negotiate all of these technical concerns. You push things to a certain brink. Sometimes it moves forward, sometimes it doesn't, but there is then always this reemergence out of those catastrophes that seem to lead to something else.
Mm-hmm. And that's the most, that's, I guess, why I make it's important for me that to be that engaged in the making of the pieces, because these points where these points of tension that build up and then just like explode, you think you're gonna to die, and then out of anxiety and tension, and then it just blows up and opens up into this tremendous, you know, new opening in your work. And I don't think that happens as much. And I think it's a different kind of way of working. Whenever you're not don't have that much control, I guess, in your process. But
I heard Richard Serra talking about that he became so proficient at what he does, and he has such a style that's so well evolved that he has to trick himself into doing something to grow. And he consciously tricks himself with ceramics, because ceramics can trick you. So maybe what you're enjoying is that process that is for sure going to lead to more growth.
That's interesting, I think. Yeah.
Courtesy Richard Serra.
Yeah.
Adrian?
You know, you answered part of it, but I think it's interesting that when you were doing large figures, beginning, you were using pop imagery, pop color, like the poodles, and things that were sort of abstracted from something else. These seem totally mythic and intuitive, and you've got a system of your landscape and figure, and they seem very mythic. Was there some sort of an epiphany where you kind of realized that you shifted into this mode of the totally intuitive, or was it sort of just like a transition? Are you going to do more poodles?
No, I don't know.
Which had that pop kind of
Yeah.
figure kind of reference.
I mean, those came out of working, you know, from or thinking about engaging form, trying to engage in them formally, and having maybe a looseness of color, and looking at Italian statuary, and everything was white, and kind of playing with the idea of them, you know, being gold or pink, and just the casualness of being able to control that and introduce an additional element, and letting go of material too. I mean, some of with the gold, I don't know if I should talk about that.
Yeah, I like gold.
Yeah.
Gold's always good.
I mean, but this work, I'd been looking at these Spanish Mallorca platters for a while, and it just struck me so amazingly and materially about them, like the broken ones that you could see the clay. It was almost like an ugly-looking clay, you know, or ugly-looking material. You know, it was dug up out of the ground somewhere or something. And as all clay is, but I mean, this stuff wasn't refined. It wasn't industrialized. And they were so stunning to me, and I thought that they might come on this work, and I put it on the back, you know, to the side, and began to influence the way I treated like the color on white of the larger figures, and gave me more interest in bringing color or treating them the way I was treating the floral pieces in a way. So I think they're becoming more connected and less separate. But initially that body of work was interested in not introduce. Well, I guess the color has a narrative part to it, but seeing them more formally instead of a kind of engagement from me as the artist in terms of painting the object. They kind of seemed like they were pink, innately pink or gold, or they didn't have this idea of me engaging with them as a maker. So I think that's what's changing in the figurative work downstairs. Except there's some monochromatic pieces down there too, right? So maybe that's where that shift, that transition is happening towards.
If we just go on, not to the color subject, but to subject of material clay, there's dozens, hundreds of different clays in different parts of the world. Is it any particular clay that you feel especially attracted to or very conducive to your processes? And is it one of the reasons why you moved back to your hometown because it's unlimited
So
supply of
much.
this particular wonderful clay?
That's a huge influence for being in Ohio because of the different clays in the quarries in that area. You know, there's a lot of different industry. still there, like failing industry, that's, which, most in the US, there's not a lot of ceramic industry, it's all on the verge of collapse because everything's moving. But yeah, initially the work came from like a European Ceramic Work Center clay that my teacher gave me or introduced me to, and it's been modified. And an interest in kind of lower temperature earthenware works because as a place that not quite earthenware, but they're a little higher temperature, mid-range earthenware, more porous, and to engage a history that seemed more connected to me. Like initially it started out as I didn't feel like I could make like a porcelain object because I didn't have that history behind me, I have that connection to the material. And it seemed more clear of a language or a path to work with this material that I felt more historically connected to from my own history. And so that's where I think the material in this work exists. But even then, like I said, like it's breaking apart, because now I want to work with porcelain and all these things. Just because the materials are so new and I don't know how to use them, and so I do, but they're so, I keep pushing for like I guess a lack of knowledge in the material, and that's what also excites me,
But also, some of the clay you're using now, you're formulating it yourself and you're mixing it yourself, correct, Matt?
Yeah, it's mixed. I have a little clay mixer that I drove from my dad's house. And so mainly has to do with that, like a connection to my history and kind of maybe a starting point, in terms of building clarity about where I've come from or who I am. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I could make like a Japanese, like a tea bowl, because it has like a white, 20-year-old or something. And so it's as an example of that.
Your works are so tactile,
Mm-hmm.
and though I'm trying to behave and not to touch them, but when LA Lord people don't see me, I still touch you.
Me too.
Watch him. Watch him.
So wonderfully tactile. But when I said tactile, even when you see them with your eyes.
And it's mouth, you can taste. You can almost visually feel, taste too. Like not literally. I've tried, but they don't. There's like a taste to some of the colors too. Sorry.
But I never in my life, I don't know why, and I know some ceramicists, artists, touched the raw clay. So for whatever reason I'm intimidated by that, not because I'm afraid to mess my hands.
Mm-hmm.
But how many materials, how many different clays you can recognize with your closed eyes?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean,
Just touching it.
Yeah, I mean, how can I don't know if I have a list, but I mean, I know exactly, with I can touch material and know exactly what it is. Yeah, like, but that comes with any practice, I think, and because I'm bad at measuring, and so if I make a mistake, but I need to know what the material is, because it's just everything's white, or a little gray or off gray, so and that's important too. I don't want my clay to be slimy. So there's a really sensual texture to it, in terms of in a color, a yellowness to it that I just really attracted to, and but I'm interested in not being able to recognize the work, like recognize the material as a maker. I think I got to a point where I could look at an object and know exactly, that's, a certain type of feldspar or a certain stain mixture, 8% this with 3% of some, and more I'm kind of curious in approaching clays that aren't as industrialized, like finding material that I can't understand as an object as easy, that are less familiar to me.
I have a question. Like this larger scale head sculpture piece which you have, is this a male or female head?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No. It's both. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. Oh, okay, one last, and then maybe we'll take them one-on-one downstairs. It's okay? So go ahead, back there.
Clearly, your work is representational, and if, say you look at someone like Kenneth Price or Donald Judd and like three-dimensional, do you feel a need or more dissatisfaction to work representational, like being an artist right now with those artists being of the past? Like say, artists after abstract expressionism going into neo-expressionism, how do you feel as...
No, I wish I could work abstractly, you know? Like a lot of my artists that yeah. But I don't know if I approach it as if I read it that yet, if I've let myself read it that way. Like I think it's shifting, but so many artists that I wish I could do that. You know, I try, but I haven't been able to do it sincerely, you know? And because things initially seemed kind of arbitrary, but I think more and more it's getting closer and I'm able to engage that. Like I could see other people do that and it makes so much sense, but I haven't been able to do that yet anymore. Like maybe I lost that ability to, but I don't think about it that way. I'm just trying to figure out the clearest way to articulate, you know, and find and teach myself and constantly learn and build a language about that I can become clearer about articulating these kind of fleeting images in my head and try and capture them before, you know.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.